So I'm having a little bit of a rough time with technology today. I rented this camera from my university's film department, but I've been having weird issues with it not taking SD cards, and it just stopped shooting like 8 seconds in, and the battery just died on me all of a sudden. So, you know what? Instead of waiting for the battery to recharge, I'm going to use my phone like I've done for every other video this month. But you know what? It's over halfway through daily December, and I'm proud that I've made it so far. At least on the recording end. I don't know how editing will go. As a little special treat, I wanted to go into my workflow a little bit, but because of forces outside of my control, I can't really recommend it to everybody. So after I record a video like this, I take the video footage, make a new Adobe Premiere project, import it, and upon ingest, I create a bunch of proxy files. Now, I record in H265, whether that's my phone camera or using OBS. Now, the reason why I do it this way is because even though it takes up more space in the short term, once I delete those proxy files, then it saves a lot of space compared to H264, and I highly doubt when I go back to an old project that I really need that proxy performance. I'm not going to be re-editing any of my old videos, I expect. Now, I could just split the difference between proxy performance and H265 performance and just use H264, but considering the rate and pace that I'm working on projects at, I really don't consider having space for all the H264 stuff really that worth it. I also realized that I could just take the H264 footage and use something like Handbrake to compress it to H265 if I really cared about saving the space, but also not wanting to not have to make proxies. But I just, with Handbrake, I found that like there's a bunch of weird visual artifacts going from one codec to another, and I don't want to mess with that stuff. Now for me, the trade-off of having, you know, that much storage space taken up in the short term is very much worth it for having really good performance compared to just sticking an H264 thing in the timeline. But in my experience, H265 support in certain programs is extremely erratic. Now, my main editing program is Adobe Premiere Pro, but for some reason, Adobe has this weird marketing thing where they say, you can edit whatever you want, just slap whatever codec you want into the timeline, when that is a blatant lie. Generally, H265 doesn't work, and notice I said generally, because there's exceptions that are oh so fun to get into. If you use OBS, you try to encode in H265, using either NVIDIA or AMD, it's not going to work in your timeline. Now, I'm surprised that Adobe Media Encoder recognizes H265 at all, and you've transcoded to Cineform, and it works perfectly fine. And while that's great and all, Cineform files are insanely huge, and if you're trying to get away with it by using smaller proxy files, you know, the original video files are completely black, so when you render the video, it's gonna be like a black screen. Now, I record all my stuff on my Galaxy S10 using H265, but for some reason, I have no idea why, that H265 works in Adobe Premiere. I also use AverMedia's Rec Central, another game recording program, and that one, using H265, works in Premiere. Oh, good. It's like, what? Why is it not consistent? So what makes Rec Central's H265 different from OBS's H265? That Rec Central can work in Premiere, but OBS doesn't. Now, I believe both programs use FFmpeg as a base for their video encoding, but that just makes things even more confusing, because then I'm not sure how they're different. And this weird property that makes the Rec Central recordings work in Premiere seems to actually transcend the initial H265 encoding itself. So for example, I had taken some Spider-Man PS4 gameplay footage I recorded at like 130 megabits per second. I imported it into Adobe Premiere. I spit it out as H264 instead of H265 like it originally was. And then I compressed the H264 file down to H265. So I went from like 12 gigs to a gig. But the weirdest thing is that when I re-imported the compressed H265, like the second version, that still worked, which is incredibly strange to me. This just raises even more questions. I know H265 has had a lot of licensing issues, and that's why a lot of programs don't support it, but that doesn't really explain why sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't either. Now, I know you might be laughing at me because you probably use DaVinci Resolve and you think that Blackmagic Design is smarter than Adobe and would support something like this by default. But at least in the free versions that I've used with DaVinci Resolve, they don't support this shit either. So what's the point of all this, really? As our needs for more and more data capacity grows, we need to fit more and more content in the same space. And the problem with that is that things are slow and it takes time to adopt things. And by the time everybody has adopted a standard, something new and better will have come along, and people will be clamoring for that, and our data needs will have changed once again, and we'll just be in the same situation that we were last time. For as bad as H265 support is, it's at least 6 years old, so there's at least been some work on it. The up-and-coming codec AV1, which is even better compression than H265. Like, outside of a YouTube playlist that allows you to play back videos in AV1, I've seen almost zero support for that codec. But this is just a problem for me as a video editor, trying to be ahead of the curve and fit a larger and larger amount of stuff in the same amount of space. So if Adobe out there is watching this video and wants to take something away from it, you guys need to support H265 because you keep increasing the price on your Creative Cloud, and you do all these scummy things like people not being legally allowed to use old versions of your software. But you can't be bothered to do shit like fix the crashing or add friggin' H265 support. But I guess I get the last laugh because as a student, I get free access to the Creative Cloud, which means I'm not directly paying Adobe, so I don't look like a total hypocrite. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.